Hello, and welcome to the Farm and Forest Improvements Program Rulemaking Advisory Committee. So if you haven't met me yet, I'm Hillary Foote. I'm the current Farm and Forest Specialist for the Department of Land Conservation and Development. And I will be supporting this Rules Advisory Committee, or RAC, as I will be referring to it, over the next several months. So first of all, thank you very much for volunteering your time to serve on this RAC. I recognize that you are all very busy humans and your time is a gift, and I really do hope to use it efficiently. To that end, this video is intended as an introduction for RAC members so that when we meet as a group at our first meeting, we can jump right into discussion on the topics that LCDC, the Land Conservation and Development Commission, has asked us to consider. Today, I'll be going over what we're asking of you as a RAC member, the schedule, communication outside of RAC meetings, and we'll also be reviewing LCDC's charge for this RAC, and then going over some background on the 4 topics that we're going to be discussing together. So you are likely watching this video because you received the materials packet with a link to it. I want to briefly touch on some of the other content that was contained in that packet. The first item in that packet is the RAC charter, which is essentially our contract or agreement for how we're going to be working together. The charter agreement includes expectation for participation by members, like attending meetings, reviewing the materials prior to meetings, productively sharing your concerns and ideas. The charter also outlines the type of support you can expect to receive from staff during the process, like preparation of meeting summaries. In that materials packet, there was also another link to a video that provides a broader overview of what it means to serve on a RAC. That video covers important aspects of public meetings law and touches on most of the operating principles and guidelines for participation that are outlined in our charter as well. So I'm not going to go over the charter today. Please do read over the charter, do watch that other video, and contact me by phone or email if you have any questions or any concerns about that agreement, the charter. In the packet, there is also a copy of the rulemaking charge approved by LCDC. The charge is a description of what it is exactly that the Commission has asked us to do. And we're going to be going over that in more detail in this video. And lastly, in that packet, you will find 2 sets of meeting materials for our first 2 meetings. And those packets contain statements of need and preliminary rule language for the topics we hope to cover in that meeting, as well as links to relevant court decisions and a summary of quotes from those cases that staff finds particularly relevant in translating the essence of the opinion communicated by the court into rule language. The meetings packet also include relevant agency guiding documents. So there's a lot of material in those meeting packets, and I really am hoping to give you as much time as possible to review all of that and prepare to participate in the discussions. As we meet throughout the RAC meeting period, additional materials will also be generated, and that will include things like RAC suggested revisions to rule language, meeting summaries, public comments provided for the RAC to consider, written comments provided by RAC members for the RAC, and the fiscal and diversity and equity impact statements, which we're going to be reviewing at our July meeting. So the department is going to be updating the rulemaking webpage throughout the process with those materials and any schedule adjustments. So you might want to bookmark that webpage for future reference. So let's spend a moment on the schedule. So we will be meeting monthly through July. We are going to be scheduling 3 hours for each meeting with roughly an hour devoted to each topic and a small break mid-meeting. So those meetings are indicated on this timeline by the little stars. During the March through June meetings, we're going to be asking our RAC members to review and suggest any needed edits to the proposed rule text and the statements of need. In July, we're going to be asking you to review and comment on the fiscal impact statement and the racial equity impact statement. So department staff will be gathering and considering all of your suggestions that we're going to be collecting throughout the RAC meeting period. And then in August, we will be integrating all of that into a notice of proposed rulemaking. I just want to pause for a moment here and clarify, that if there are comments or perspectives from this RAC that we choose not to integrate into the rule proposal, we're going to note that and your perspective in our report to the Land Conservation and Development Commission for the September rulemaking hearing. So that September rulemaking hearing is going to be the first of 2 commission hearings on these rules. And you're also going to have the opportunity to provide, additional comments or your perspective as a member of the public as a part of that hearing process. It would be lovely if our RAC comes to a place where we all agree, but that doesn't necessarily need to happen. We also may possibly meet in October if there is a need to. And that would be determined after the September Commission hearing on the rulemaking. And this process will run and be closed out in December. The final adoption hearing for rulemaking is scheduled for early December of 2024. So I'm just going to touch a little bit on who we are and some of the perspectives that I'm really excited to hear. So on this RAC, we have a number of lawyers who are very familiar with the way in which the courts have viewed and interpreted our rules. We have a number of rural planning professionals on the RAC who work with rules on a daily basis at the planning counter, where they explain these rules to applicants and other rural residents. And, it's often these planners who are writing findings addressing our rule provisions. So there are a number of planners on this RAC. On our RAC, we also have farmers who own land protected under the Goal 3 program, who understand what it is to operate a farm business under the regulatory structures that we have, not just the land use program, but under other regulatory structures like ODA regulations and DEQ and OSHA, et cetera. And they can share a perspective on what it's like to operate a business in a changing landscape. We also have members who work to support farm, forest, and woodlot industries in a variety of ways as advocates, as industry representatives. And we have folks who work with development interests and bring a different perspective to the conversation. So I want to acknowledge that many of the members on this RAC have been involved in discussions around Goal 3 for several decades, and some of them may have written articles or papers on the topic. Many of the folks on this RAC are quite passionate and aren't afraid to share that passion. And of course, some of our RAC members may not be as practiced or as comfortable sharing their views on these issues. All of you were invited to participate in this RAC because we want to hear your viewpoint. And I am going to do my very best to moderate these discussions in a way that provides the whole group space to hear all perspectives. If, however, a member just doesn't feel comfortable sharing with the group, or say something occurs to you after the meeting, I do want to collect all of those thoughts. So I would really encourage you to go ahead and email me your thoughts directly, and I will share those thoughts along with any public comments received to the RAC. Same goes if you miss a meeting or aren't able to attend a meeting. We're asking folks to make your very best effort to attend all of the readings. If something happens and you can't, I'm going to encourage you to watch the meeting recording, consider the comment, and email me your thoughts and perspectives. Please, however, do not email other members of the RAC. You won't be given email addresses of other members, but many of you know each other, and in this day and age, it isn't hard to dig up contact information. We will run afoul of public meetings law if you start emailing each other. So please send your thoughts to me directly. So the current charge for this RAC, and again, the charge is the direction from LCDC. The current charge for this RAC is fairly narrow. It involves the codification of existing case law standards. And the intent behind this rulemaking is to improve consistency of implementation of those standards across the state and to avoid unnecessary appeals where those standards weren't clear, weren't known by the approving body. Because these are standards established by the courts, all of these standards have already been interpreted within the policy context of Goal 3. And I would add that the topics we are considering and the cases we are considering have all been interpreted in a way that the agency supports. As I've discussed with all of the RAC members individually, it is possible LCDC may actually choose to expand the charge of this RAC at their meeting in late April. They may adopt revisions to this charge, and we may be considering some additional topics. We will address that if it happens after the April LCDC meeting. All right, so now I'm going to take a few minutes just to provide a little bit more detail on what we're going to be discussing. Okay. So we're going to start our discussions with a fundamental piece of the Goal 3 program, the Farm Impacts Test, or 215-296. Exclusive farm use zoning has always been associated with a tax program. The zoning is intended to be restrictive, and only those uses that have been established by the legislature are permissible. Chapter 215 of statute contains that list of uses other than farm uses, which may be permitted in exclusive farm use zones. And that list is divided into two categories, or two buckets, as I like to call them. So the first are uses that the legislature decided were compatible with farm and forest operations, as long as the standards established for them were adhered to. Those are sub 1 uses. And then there's a second bucket of uses where the legislature thought maybe these could be compatible with surrounding farm and forest uses. It depends on the particular proposal and the particular property. So we sometimes refer to these as conditional uses or sub 2 uses because they require an individualized review. All of the uses listed in 215-213 sub 2 and 215-283 sub 2 are in that bucket. And for those, statute requires at a minimum that a county find that the proposed use will not force significant change in farm and forest practices in the surrounding area and will not significantly increase the cost of farm and forest practices on the surrounding lands. So that aspect of a review is referred to as the Farm Impacts Test. Because the Farm Impacts Test criteria is applied to all of the conditional uses on farmland, and there are a lot of them, counties regularly need to provide findings under the Farm Impacts Test. So what this test is really asking is if the proposal has the potential to harm neighbors who are farming or running woodlots or forest operations. And answering that question requires discretion on the part of the reviewing authority, and it can be very difficult and honestly very emotional as the authority is considering testimony around this question: is my livelihood going to be harmed by this? Because the Farm Impacts Test applies to all conditional uses because of the nature of the question, because of the discretion involved in the decision, this is a criteria that has been a frequent topic at the courts. And there's a lot that the courts have said about this over the years. We are proposing to look at language from 4 cases: Schellenberg, Von Lubken, Stop the Dump, and the recent Marion County agri-tainment case. In the materials packet for the first meeting, you'll find links to those cases if you wish to read them in full. You will also find staff-selected relevant quotes from those cases, and you will find draft rule language that is intended to be a starting point for our discussion. Since we are on the topic of the farm impacts test, it's actually a nice segue into a discussion of our rules related to transportation improvements on rural lands. And we're going to be talking about that in this second meeting. The language in the transportation planning rules, Oregon Administrative Rule 660, 1265. The language in that section of rule have been described as ambiguous as to whether or not the farm impacts test should be applied to a certain set of transportation facilities on rural lands when they're proposed on lands that are protected under the farm and forest conservation programs. So it has long been the agency's position that the farm impacts test applies to them. And in recent decisions, the courts have supported our position. The materials packet for that meeting includes a copy of our guidance document that explains the agency position on the matter in detail. And so the fundamental issue here really is, if the potential to impact neighboring farm and forest operations needs to be considered as a part of that land use review or not. Do we believe that facilities of these types have the potential to impact operations, or do we believe that they are already compatible and so the review and opportunity for public impact isn't required? The Van Dyke-Yamhill case, the Yamhill-West Sider Trail case, addresses the agency's view on this question, and a link to that decision is provided in the meeting materials for our second RAC meeting, as well as that guidance document. All right, back to the first meeting. The second topic we'll be considering at our first meeting is a use category called commercial activities in conjunction with farm use. So commercial activities in conjunction with farm use are a vaguely defined category, and it tends to act as a catch-all with a wide variety and intensity of uses being permitted under this category. There aren't any standards in statute or rule associated with this use, and it is the second most commonly approved use in farm zones. So there are multiple court rulings establishing case law standards in a variety of aspects of this use. DLCD, the agency, has referenced these established case law standards in its model code for exclusive farm use zones, but we have not taken the step to codify them into statute or rule, and therefore they're applied inconsistently throughout the state. Some counties actually integrated them into their ordinances, some have not. So we're proposing to look at language from 5 cases that help to explain what constitutes a commercial activity in conjunction with farm use. We will look at Ballin, at Craven, Chauncey, City of Sandy, and the more recent Marion County agri-tainment case. So in the materials packet again, for the first meeting, you're going to find links to those cases. You will find relevant quotes from those cases, and you'll find draft rule language, again intended to be as a starting point for discussion. And I would just note here that the draft rulemaking you'll see there is what's in our model code with some additional language from the agri-tainment case. And lastly, at our second meeting, we'll be looking at 2 standards that apply to proposals for agritourism events, as they're authorized at 215.213 sub 11 and 215.283 sub 4. So there are sort of 4 levels, if you will, to agritourism and other commercial event permits. And those levels sort of increase in frequency and intensity. So there are statutory standards that require that all of those events, regardless of the level, must be incidental and subordinate to the existing farm use of the property. Then approvals for the more intense category, which is an authorization for up to 18 events per year, must also be found necessary to support the commercial farm operation or the commercial agricultural enterprises of the area. And they're fairly vague standards, and counties have interpreted these standards in a variety of ways, and that has led to unequal application across the state. So there is a fairly recent case, the 2020 DiBenedetti case, which took those standards in some detail and provides some useful guidance. So in the materials packet for the second meeting, you will also find a link to that case, relevant quotes, and draft rule language that is, again, intended to be a starting point for discussion. All right. So I hope that will be helpful in getting us ready for our first conversation. Thank you again for volunteering your time to provide your thoughts on these topics. When we meet in a few weeks, we're going to move fairly quickly right into discussion. So if you have any questions about expectations, process, or these topics in general, don't hesitate to reach out to me. You can reach me via email or give me a call. Email is usually the best way to get hold of me. If you have more technical questions, say about Zoom or the website or YouTube, go ahead and reach out to Casaria Taylor for administrative support. She'll be providing support during our meetings as well. Her contact is listed here. It's on the project webpage. It'll be on the agendas. So I am very excited for these discussions, and I am really looking forward to working with all of you over the next coming months. All right, thank you very much.